It's your open source advocate, and I'm back with another video. And this week I wanted to talk about something pretty important, and it really saved me a lot of work and a lot of headache and heartache. So I want to talk about Docker organization. I recently had a virtual machine that just died, and it was one of my main VMs that it didn't die, but it actually just had the weirdest thing happen to it, and I don't know why, and I couldn't figure out why, but it was where I ran a lot of my Docker installs, and really the organization of Docker that I use is what saved me from having to completely redo everything, from losing data and things like that. And also the tool Proxmox helped a ton with that. They had some great instructions that I was able to follow to move an external storage device from one VM to another. So I want to kind of go through what happened and tell you how I have things set up and organized and kind of show you how that works, because I think organization when you're starting to work with self-hosting is really important from the get-go, because before you realize it, you start off with one and you think, well, I don't really need to do anything. Then you add another self-hosted thing and you're, Docker or straight up install, doesn't matter. You're like, well, it's only two things. I don't really need to do anything. And pretty soon you've got like 8 different things you're self-hosting and you're like, I wish I would have organized this from the beginning. And you kind of look at the task and it's kind of daunting. You think, well, I'll be okay. 15 different self-hosted things in, you're going, oh my gosh, what a mess. And you just hate to even think about redoing it, but really you realize it'll save you at some point if you do. I was in this boat, and I'm glad that I redid my organization, 6-8 months back. And I even saw a thread on this not too long on the self-hosted subreddit talking about it, and they all did things very similar to what I'm going to show you actually as well. So let me give you some really good advice up front. Even if you're really far along and you don't have it very organized, take the time now to stop and reorganize it and fix it, because it will save you so much effort in the long run if anything catastrophic ever happens. The other thing is have backups, because that was my other snafu, is I didn't have backups of everything. I had backups of data and I had backups of some other stuff, but I didn't really back up like a snapshot of my system, which would have made it much easier for me to bring everything back up. But luckily the organization really helped. So I want to go through that at least for you guys today. I want to say thank you to all of my patrons over at Patreon and my subscribers on YouTube. Thank you so much for all of your support. I love doing this channel. I love making this media and this content for you. I hope you enjoy it as well. I do post all of the videos now over at Patreon after one of my patrons made the suggestion, and I don't know why it didn't dawn on me before that. But if you're interested in seeing them through Patreon and getting a notification through Patreon instead of through YouTube, or hoping that YouTube's algorithms happens to show it to you, jump over and become a supporter on Patreon, patreon.com. I've got the links in the description and the show notes. I appreciate your support. Thank you so much. This is the Docker webpage, of course. I'm going to jump over here to draw.io. So this is kind of my layout. Right here on the outside, you can see that I've got Proxmox running, and it's, really encompassing everything that we see here. From there, I've got this VM that's a Ubuntu 2004 server VM. And here I've got listed all of my Docker containers, or some of my Docker containers anyways. This definitely isn't all of them. And then on this same Proxmox system, I've got a Home Assistant VM, I've got a TrueNAS VM, and I've got some LXC containers that I'm playing with to try to learn a little bit more about LXC. And then I've got this external storage, or I hate to say external, but it's another storage device that has about 8 terabytes of space, and I break that apart inside of Proxmox as well into different chunks for different storage purposes, allocated to these different VMs for things. So this is really kind of attached to this Ubuntu thing. Really, it's this one here for the most part, but really this is kind of attached to my Ubuntu server right now. And what I had was about 3 terabytes of that allocated to the Ubuntu server that I was running. I had been messing with my network, like I had put on my post there not long ago, and I was switching out hardware and stuff, and I don't know if that's what caused it or if it was just happened to be, kind of similar timing, but you can see here I use Sonar, I use qBittorrent, I use Jacket, I use Jellyfin, I use a VPN, Homer, just so many things that I run on this server. And I had UR backup set up from the video that we had done not too long ago, and I was using that to back things up, luckily, which was great because I had my data backed up. But I didn't really have this structure backed up, so that was kind of the part that I had to do a little manual work on. But what happened was this Ubuntu VM just suddenly decided that it wanted the firewall on. It was going to block all incoming and outgoing connections, and I don't know why. On every single port, I went and checked the UFW. It was inactive. I activated it and I created exceptions to try to push things through, and it still didn't work. I I shut down Docker because Docker, of course, likes to put rules in your firewall above everything else. I went and looked at those Docker rules that I gave you guys to try to get it to take those things. And I could get it by just deleting all the iptables rules and basically flushing all the iptables rules and doing a few of the commands that I found. I could get it to where I could go out and I could ping google.com and I could get to the internet, but I couldn't get to anything on my network for some reason still, on my local network that it was attached to. So I kept investigating and I messed with this for probably a week, just back and forth, trying to figure out, like, how do I get this thing back open so I can start using it again, because I couldn't get to my Jellyfin. I couldn't, of course, none of these applications were doing what they're supposed to do. VPN couldn't connect anyways, so it didn't matter. But I couldn't connect to any of this stuff that's inside of this VM, but I could connect to Home Assistant fine. I started up TrueNAS, connected up no problem. It was doing its thing, pulled down updates. Home Assistant was running no problem. So it was not at the Proxmox level, but I double checked to make sure there wasn't a firewall set. I looked in Proxmox at all three levels, which was the node level for the VM, the Proxmox node level, and then the data center level. All of those were disabled. I had never enabled them anyways, just because I run it only inside my network. I don't expose it to the outside internet. So I really couldn't figure out why on earth this was all getting blocked and why I had to keep flushing and deleting the iptables. But as soon as I'd reboot, it was all back the same way. And then one day I just said, I'm just going to leave it on. And after about 2 hours, it was back to the same way. So there was something really weird happening on my system, and I don't understand what it was. But I said, okay, the actual solution here is just create another VM, set it up the same way, run through all of the updates for the Ubuntu 2004 stuff, which I did. Use my script to install all of the stuff that I wanted, which was Docker, Docker Compose, and Portainer Agent. And then go back and just try to migrate all of these containers over. So the containers themselves, no big deal, because I organize my data in a way that makes it really easy. So I'm going to show you what I did there. All right, I'm SSH'd into my new server, and I'll show you exactly what I have. So I have, if I do ls, you can see here, I've got this folder that got created just now when I set up all my stuff again for Sonar, Radar, all the R's, right? But this is the folder that I just migrated over. So I had to get that system where I could reach out long enough to save this folder over to the storage drive. So the storage drive was still attached. I could access it fine, no problem. The 3 terabytes were there. And really this folder structure is what saved me. So if I go in and I say cd docker, and we look at this, you can see here, I've got quite a few things just listed right here. And this is not all of the containers that I had, but I also didn't want all of the containers I had. I had a bunch of containers that were testing containers. But here, I've created this folder structure inside of it. So I've got Jellyfin, and then I've got my docker setup info.txt just in case I needed something. I've got ExpressVPN that I use. I've got Authelia. I've got Homer, I've got MariaDB, I've got Mesh Central, NTOP-NG, Organizer, Portainer Agent, Solid Invoice, and Unbound. So some of the other containers I just installed straight up through Portainer, which was great. It makes it easy. I was able to do it again, no problem. Just go back to my notes that I took at the time, make sure that I had everything set up the same way, and no big deal. But these things, by having these things the way that they are, so if I go into Jellyfin, you can see here that I've got this file called docker-run.txt, and you've probably seen me making these in the last few videos because it really does save you some time so that you're not doing history, pipe, grep, docker, or Jellyfin, and right now this will work because it's still pretty new. In fact, it didn't work. Look at that. So it didn't even come up yet. So if I do history, I can see all of the things that I've been typing in, and it goes back, so many commands. And you can see I've got a bunch of commands that I've been running and different things that I've been doing and stuff like that. So looking for that to the history isn't the easiest thing, but I can do cat docker-run, docker, if I spell it right, .txt. And you can see here that I've got my Jellyfin command that I run to set up where I want to have everything stored. So you can see here, this is in my home folder inside of Docker, inside of Jellyfin, the config, inside of Jellyfin, the cache, and then this is where my media is stored that I want Jellyfin to let me map, so it lets me map it pretty easily. And then here, net equals host, Jellyfin. Now you can set up your ports on Jellyfin, you don't have to do net equals host, but this is easy enough and it uses a port that's not that common, so it works for me fine. But this is the command that I use, and I can just highlight this and then click here, and it's going to be like ready to go, and it's going to try to do it, so I'm going to tell it to stop because I already have Jellyfin running. It doesn't need to actually run it again. But I've got that ready and it's good to go. So I'm going to go back and I'm inside Docker again, inside that Docker folder. But you can see I've got the same thing for Authelia, for ExpressVPN Docker, for Homer, for MariaDB, for Mesh Central, for IntopNG. For all of these things, I've got these different folders that I've set up so that it's not so hard for me to get this set back up. And all I did was zip up this folder off of the old drive so I could luckily access it through the console on Proxmox. I zipped up this folder. I moved it over onto the external hard drive, and then on Proxmox site, they had some really clear instructions on here's how you detach that drive from one virtual machine and attach it to a new virtual machine and make sure that it's going to come up and work. And it was great because that's what I needed. I needed to make sure that that thing was going to be there and ready to go because it has all my data on it as well, right? So I have my data backed up, but I didn't have to go through the process of pulling it all back over if I didn't have to. And their instructions were really easy. It took me about 10 minutes to go through the instructions, put in the commands, make sure I had everything correct for my system, basically replacing certain things that they had as placeholder text, right? But other than that, it was just like following my own instructions. Basically go through, make sure things look good, test it first if you can, and then run it. And it really just, this setup really made it so much easier for me that I just can't express enough to you how important it is to do something like this. So if we look at Intop here, and we do ls, there's my Docker Compose file, and then here's even my data file. So when I zip this up, I got all my data. IntopNG came over. I ran docker compose.yaml. I just ran docker compose up-d, and when I ran it, it already had this data file there, and it went in and looked for all the information that it needed, and it came right up. I didn't have to change anything except for one little piece in there that was the network address that I have set up for IntopNG, because my network address has changed when I redid this stuff. I went ahead and organized my network addresses a little bit too, so the IP address changed for that container, or for that VM. Same way as far as this stuff goes for like Organizer and Unbound and Solid Invoice. So Solid Invoice is another one. I've been using it because I showed it to you guys, but I've been using it for my private business. I have about 3 clients in this town that I live in that I do any kind of IT support for, I guess is the best way to put it. And when I do something, I send them an invoice. They can see it on my system, and it's really great. And that same thing, if I go into Solid Invoice and I do an ls, there's my Docker Compose. Again, I have my DB data right here in that folder. All I had to do was pull it over. Everything was already mapped. I just had to run the Docker Compose up, and it came up and it was running, and I went to the IP address. Now, it wanted to take me through the startup wizard again, which was fine. But once I got to the startup wizard, it said, hey, there's already an admin account on here. So it even had my original admin account. I didn't have to create a new one. And I was ready to go. My invoices are there. Everything works fine. It was really, really tremendous. The one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that this thing basically zips up that Docker folder every day. And so this level right here, I want it to zip this up every day and back that up for me. And then once that's done, I've got a really great backup of all my systems. So if anything like that happens again, I go grab that zip file and I just open it up and I run all this stuff and bring it right back up. Like I said, there might be a minor change to some, network IP address or something like that I have to change. But other than that, really bringing all these containers back up and running probably took me 20 minutes. And that's these plus Sonar, plus Jacket, plus qBittorrent, including all of the, setup, because it was already done and it was in those folders where I have those things, where those things were stored from Portainer. It was easy. Now, you need to know that Portainer does store things in certain locations unless you tell it to store it in a different location. In my case, it was in the ARR folder. I just grabbed the ARR folder and brought it along with these things. I left it outside of the Docker container for now, because those are a little bit more complex setup. I want to make sure I'm not going to break something when I do it, so I'm going to create a clone of this VM and test with it. But, that said, this really just saved me so much time by having this organized like this. I mean, you could have stuff in your home folder, but you could have stuff all over the place. If you just run a Docker command and you don't really change the volume mappings that you get in generalized Docker commands, it's going to put it in a few different places potentially on your system. It usually puts it, I think, in like /var, /opt/docker or something like that. I want these things where I can have them right here, where I can get it zipped up and get it backed up easily every single day. And it's really pretty easy to write a script to do that. So I'm definitely getting set to do that. I've got my script ready. I wanted to zip this stuff up, move it over, back it up every day. And then, of course, I could use the Proxmox stuff that's built in too to get snapshots. So that'd make it easier next time for me. And I probably should do that. I just need to think about my storage space as far as that goes. But really, I wanted to talk to you about the organization side of this and really how by having this single top level file or folder, it made it really easy. Now, for me, I'm running like 12 or 13 containers. If you're running like 30 containers, you might want to break this down some more. So when we start talking about breaking this down into more levels, it's kind of important for you to say, you know what? I can categorize these different containers. So like where I have on my Homer dashboard, if we go back to here, I have categories. So these 3 fall under remote management. And I have Guacamole running now. I need to add it. So that'd be 4, right? Networking, I have right here. Home management, this is kind of my home management stuff. Even though this is really a management of the server, it's still managing my home server, right? Nginx Proxy Manager the same way. And then if I go back to my first tab, I've got things broken up into categories. Now, this is not all on a single server, for one thing, but I could take the things that are on a single server like I have on that one back there, and I could break it up into categories of these applications and start breaking up my folder. So when you start getting a lot of applications on one server, that might even be a secondary kind of way of categorizing and organizing things. Because you might, if your system goes down like mine did, and you say, you know what? I had Home Assistant running on that thing in Docker. Home Assistant's really important. It lets me run my entire house. I need to make sure that I can bring it right back up. So one, having backups of Home Assistant is really important, so make sure you make those regularly. But on top of that, if you just want to bring that back up through Docker, if you have Home Assistant in here, you might want to have that inside of something called Home Management. So you could just do make directory home mgmt, just to keep it short. And then you can put stuff inside of home management that's important for your home management, because maybe that's the first most important thing you want to bring back up. After that, maybe it's media. Maybe it's invoices for your business. So you could have a business section. You could have, media section. You could have all kinds of different categories. And you can go crazy with categories, but you can keep them kind of light. Put things inside those folders that make sense, and then map those volumes to those folders so your data's in there with your application. And when you bring that stuff over and it's zipped up and you bring it all out, you're talking about a tremendous time savings. You're talking about a tremendous load off of your mind that you still have your data because you put it in a place that you could find it again. I just can't express how important this was that I had it set up this way for bringing up my system pretty quickly. I know I messed with it for a week. That was just me trying to fix the problem for a week and just saying, you know what? None of my super important systems are on here other than Solid Invoice. And again, I don't have that much business through that, so I didn't need it at the time. So I was fine. But after a week, I was like, okay, I'm tired of messing with this, and I don't have any idea what's wrong, and nobody I've asked has been able to give me an answer that would help. So I guess I baffled other people as well. I don't know. But I said, okay, I'm going to create a new VM and make sure everything seems to work, and we're just going to go through this again. Again, that took me, probably creating the VM and updating it took longer than the rest of putting everything together on it, to be honest. My script made it really fast to get Docker and Docker Compose installed. All of these things made it really fast to bring back up these containers. And I was able to check them really quick, and they were working. The only thing I had to do was go into Nginx Proxy Manager and fix the IP address of where that points inside my network, and everything was up and running again. So I hope that this gives you some inspiration. I hope that it gives you some direction if you're a new user to Docker especially. But even if you've been doing it for a while, if you're following my videos, please make it organized when you're creating these folders and you're creating new projects and you're trying to self-host new things. If you're just testing something to see how it runs and you plan to do a production version later if you like it, create a folder called testing. Because maybe you can ignore that folder from your backup because you're like, if I lose it, I don't care. If I don't lose it, okay, great, I have it. But if I lose it, I don't care. And you could just ignore that from your backup and save some space, but you have the things in there that you're testing, and when you're ready, you can move those things to a folder that make more sense, make your adjustments inside of your Docker Compose files or your docker-run.txt files, and bring them up and run them for production. I hope that my pain will help you grow and learn, and I hope that what I've gone through will give you some inspiration. If you enjoyed this video, if you got something out of it, tell your friends about it so they can come along the journey with us. Like, subscribe, and I'll talk to you next time.